The scullery door at Ottershaw Park had a latch that could be lifted in silence if you knew the trick of it, and Jacintha Pinnock had known the trick of it for 2 years. She let herself out into the grey-gold half-light before 6, a shawl over her shoulders and a cracked blue-rimmed saucer held flat under it, and she crossed the wet flags of the kitchen yard with the unhurried competence of a woman committing a very small crime for the 100th time. The crime was this. Mr. Cyril Farrant, the late Duke's nephew, who managed the household and its purse, had posted an edict in the servants' hall the winter before. No strays to be harboured about the offices. Vermin found upon the premises to be destroyed. Jacintha was 27, the Dowager Duchess's paid companion at £20 a year and her keep, and a companion dismissed without a character, had few roads left in England worth the walking. She weighed all of that every morning, and came out anyway, carrying half her own supper on a saucer. She had done the sums often enough. Her father had been rector of Abbotsmead, a scholarly, unworldly man who died with his affairs unsettled, and his daughter had come down the long slide from gentleman's daughter to paid companion in a single winter. Too well born for the kitchen, too poor for the drawing-room, belonging to neither. Below her present rung came governessing for strangers, then shirts at 6pence the piece, then the parish. She fed the cat anyway. What she loved, she fed, and she asked leave of nobody. She set it down at the scullery step and clicked the china once against the stone. The cat did not come when called. Jacintha had tried calling, early on, and felt a fool. Gooseberry came for the click of the saucer, and came now, out of the currant bushes, low and quick, a small calico with a white bib and a splash of orange over the left eye. She ate, crouched, shoulders up, watching the middle distance. When the saucer was clean, Gooseberry stood, put her tail up like a flag, and pushed her head once against Jacintha's knuckles. That was the whole of her thanks. Then she was gone along the wall. Behind them both, the great house stood dark. Fires were laid in 2 rooms only, by order of economy. The old Duke was 6 months dead. The new one kept to his own wing and was seen, the maid said, at windows. It was a house that had been told to be cold, and had obeyed. Jacintha bent for the saucer and stopped. Beside the step, wrapped in coarse paper and tied with string, lay a parcel. She opened a corner of it. Trimmings from the game larder, rabbit, a little venison, more meat than her saucer had carried in a week. Parcels had come at odd intervals for nearly 2 years, lately oftener. This was the 3rd that month. The cook, she decided, straightening. The cook had a soft heart under all that flour, and a soft heart thanked was a soft heart frightened off. She would keep it to herself. She tucked the parcel under her shawl beside the saucer and went in. A week later, the weather turned kind, and she grew bold with it. The kitchen garden lay open to the early sun. Lavender rose steaming faintly, the wall fruit warming, and Jacintha carried the saucer out to a broad flagstone by the cold frames, the light being too good to waste on a dark step. Gooseberry was already there, stretched on the warm stone. The saucer clicked. The cat ate. Jacintha knelt in her rose madder wool with the sun on her face, and let herself, for one unguarded minute, be happy. The cat finished, sat, and began on her white bib. The Duke of Ottershaw came around the yew hedge with his hat in his hand. He stopped. She froze on her knees, one hand still out. She knew only the plain shape of her situation, the edict in the servants' hall, the saucer in plain sight, and the master of Ottershaw standing 10 feet away in the morning light. And Gooseberry, finished, trotted directly past his boots, head high, carrying in her teeth a twisted white paper spill she had stolen from heaven knew where. Tail up, entirely unembarrassed, a small thief leaving the scene at a walk because running was beneath her. The Duke watched the cat out of sight. Clifford, Duke of Ottershaw, was 33 and 6 months in the title. A tall man, broad through the shoulder, with dark auburn hair and a face the county called cold. Jacintha had been 3 years in the house and had heard his voice perhaps a dozen times. "What do you call it?" he asked. "Gooseberry, Your Grace." Her own voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "For her eyes, she is not mine." "No," he said. He looked at the saucer on the flag and at the mended forefinger of her glove, and she saw him do the arithmetic of it, plainly in the open. "She appears to be her own." He did not name the edict. He did not say the word stray, or the word vermin, or the word rule. "Is she wild, or only unowned?" "Unowned, Your Grace. 2 years this autumn she has come to that step, and she was starving when she started. The truth then, all of it. She had decided in one heartbeat that a lie would be worse. She is an honest animal. She has yet to pretend, even once, that she likes me for myself. And what is she fed on?" "My supper, Your Grace. Part of it." Something crossed his face at that, quickly, and was put away. He stood a moment longer in the sun, hat in hand, and Jacintha knelt with her livelihood balanced on a saucer and watched him decide something she could not yet read. "The mornings are the best of this house," he said at last. "I find I walk at this hour." He inclined his head, to her, or possibly to the cat's departed tail, and walked on down the lavender row. He had said not one word that bound him. She knelt on the warm stone, with her heart going hard, and understood that everything now depended on what a silent man chose to do with what he knew. What he did was quieter than anything she had braced for. The days went by, the summons stayed unwritten, the edict stayed posted and unenforced, and Jacintha went on feeding her lodger and began, cautiously, to breathe. Her days belonged to the Dowager. Griselda, Dowager Duchess of Ottershaw, was 74, and sat straighter than any woman in the county, silver hair, dressed high, black eyes quicker than the room. Farrant's economy had reduced her to 2 rooms and a fire that might be lit after 9, and she garrisoned those 2 rooms. "Well," she said each morning, "and how does that disreputable animal?" "Thriving, madam. She has discovered the flue ledge behind the scullery and sleeps on it like a duchess." "Impertinence. Duchesses sleep cold at Ottershaw. It is the fashion. The paring-knife wit, always, and always used kindly, or at least used on the deserving." Jacintha had learnt to know the mornings when grief had got in before breakfast and the wit came slower for it. She had been mistress of this house for 50 years. They had been good years, and she said so plainly, which took more courage than mourning ever did. He had made her laugh in 1767 and was still doing it in December last. And a woman who had been laughing for 50 years did not intend to stop merely because the cause of it was gone. She wore her black straight-backed. She asked after the cat daily while officially deploring it. It was Jacintha, setting down the saucer one bright morning, who gave the animal her standing in the household. "No lodger stays at Ottershaw without paying rent, madam. You are 3 weeks in arrears." The Dowager received this gravely. "Has she offered a note of hand?" "She offered a dead shrew, madam. I declined it. Then the arrears mount, and thereafter the arrears were inquired into at breakfast, solemnly, as an item of business, and the cat paid not a farthing, and was kept anyway, and neither woman remarked on what that proved. What the house itself was kept on was less comfortable. The old Duke had died in January, and the will Mr. Farrant produced was dated 1809, 8 years stale. Title and entailed land to Clifford, as the patent and the family settlement required, and beyond the reach of any will. Every farthing the old Duke had been free to give, the funded money, the personal fortune, the unentailed farms, to his sister's son, Mr. Cyril Farrant, the new Duke's first cousin, named sole executor into the bargain. His widow was left her jointure, and that alone, the sum her marriage settlement had fixed on her in 1767, modest, fixed, and all she had. The dower house went to Cyril with the rest, and so did every shilling that had kept her household on its legs. On paper, the widow of 50 years held a small fixed income and lost her establishment, and the man of business was master of the purse. Griselda gave her verdict early, flatly, and to Farrant's face, which was her style. "The will is genuine, Cyril. I watched my husband sign things for 50 years, and that is his hand. And the will is wrong. He had grown cool to you by Michaelmas last. I sat at table and watched him grow cool, and cool men do not leave fortunes. That paper misreads a man I knew better than his tailor did. You will tell me the law cares little for an old woman's reading of her husband, and you will be right, and we will both remember that I said it." Farrant took it beautifully. He was 38, near black hair, blue-black superfine cut in town, and a face that promised courtship and would read, much later, as a creditor's. "Dear aunt," he said, "grief must be allowed its arithmetic. Mine is humbler. The household must be put on a footing." His cruelties all dressed as economy, and walked abroad in daylight. The fires, the closed rooms, the pensioners struck off. "At Michaelmas," he said, naming the quarter-day aloud at her own table, he would take the home farm under the will. The dower establishment would be consolidated, the resident companion reviewed. "Reviewed," said Griselda, when he had bowed himself out. "I have been 50 years a duchess, child, and I have yet to be reviewed." "Madam," said Jacintha carefully, "might the Duke—" "My son," said the Dowager, "is the best man in this county. He has been shot at by the French, and buried his dearest friend, and he cannot at present carry his voice across a room full of chairs. Those 3 facts live in the same house, child, and Cyril knows it better than anyone. Pour the tea." 3 parcels in a month had made silence feel less like tact than like taking, and so Jacintha thanked the cook that week, in passing, for the trimmings. The cook looked at her with honest bafflement, said the game larder was locked and Mr. Farrant kept an eye on the very bones of it, and asked what parcels. Jacintha begged her pardon and spoke of something else. Someone provisioned the saucer, someone with keys, or standing, or nerve. She turned it over that night and then deliberately put it down. Some mercies die of being asked after. She let this one live. In that cold-shouldered establishment there were 2 creatures fed by stealth, and belonging nowhere, the cat at the Scullery Step, and the master of the house, who took his meals on trays in the west wing and was seen at windows. Kindness done in secret is still seen. The unwanted keep watch for one another, and always have. The Duke began to be wrong about his hours. He had walked his lavender at 6 because he could not sleep. Once. Then it became twice. Then it became a custom that neither of them named. Jacintha would come out with the saucer and find him at the far end of the rows, hat in hand. By the 3rd week he came nearer, and by the 4th he stood over the flagstone while Gooseberry ate, ignoring them both magnificently. "She has robbed the still room again," Jacintha said one morning, by way of a state of the nation. "Half the box of spills gone since Sunday. The housemaid has laid an information against the mice." "Against the mice?" "Mice of unusual organization, Your Grace. They take only the twisted spills and carry them upstairs. One was found in Her Grace's slipper on Tuesday, which the mice deny." He looked down the garden to where the Calico sat on the wall, a fresh white spill clamped in her teeth, contraband moving under bond. He laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, long out of use. "And is she prosecuted?" he asked. "The mice being innocent." "There is a difficulty about witnesses, Your Grace. The only party who watches her is disinclined to inform." "Then she is safe," he said, "for I am the other party who watches, and I am disinclined too." It was the nearest either of them had come to saying aloud what they were, two people standing inside the same secret. After that, the secret had 3 keepers. The Parliament of 3 met most mornings after that: Duke, Companion, and Cat, and the Dowager, who missed little within a mile of her 2 rooms, began inventing errands for her companion of a suspicious geometry. "You are pale, child. Go and quarrel with that animal of yours." He talked. That was the astonishment of the summer. The silent man talked, and each time the cat opened the door of it. A question about where a stray wintered became the house, as it had stood in his boyhood. "Every hearth in it lit," he said, looking up at the dark windows. "You could hear my father laugh 2 floors off. He laughed a great deal. People forget that about him, because the portraits scowl." A pause. "My cousin calls the cold rooms economy. My father would have called them what they are, and turned him out of doors in his own coat." "And his son, Your Grace?" "His son," said the Duke, "watches from the gallery, and is ashamed, and does it again the next day." Another morning, an idle report of Gooseberry asleep on the warm flue top became the Peninsula, and then, in 6 flat sentences, Waterloo, and the friend who had gone out with him and stayed on that field. She understood that she was the first person he had let see it whole. "He would have liked this garden," the Duke said at the end of it. "He would have laughed at me, standing about in the lavender at 6 in the morning. He kept me sensible for 7 years, and I have been short of it since." "You might practice, Your Grace," said Jacintha. "The mornings are said to be the best of this house." He looked at her a long moment. "So I have heard it argued," he said, and that morning, for the first time, he was the one who stayed at the flagstone after the saucer was licked clean. "You have been fair to everyone in this house," she said once, because it was true. The maid's wages, the pensions Mr. Farrand struck off that, reappeared. "Everyone knows whose hand that is." "Small things," he said. "Then why the large silence? You could contest the consolidation. Take back the management. It is yours to take." He was quiet so long, she thought she had spent it all. "To fight paper," he said at last, "a man must speak. Rooms full of people, Miss Pinnock. Attorneys. My cousin swims in that element and always has. Since the 18th of June, 1815, I have found that I—" He stopped and finished simply. "I hoard my voice. It is a flaw. I know its name, and knowing a flaw's name has yet to cure one." Underneath the summer, the screw turned by small clicks. An inventory taken of the plate. A hedgerow of standing timber sold. The dower house chimneys surveyed by men who measured everything and mended nothing. Farrand, meeting Jacintha in the corridor, was exquisitely civil, and had begun to watch her with a new attention empty of admiration. The rain came back at the end of August, and with it the evening that changed everything. "Go down and see about my tisane yourself, child," the dowager said that wet evening. "The bell brings Cyril's people, and I am out of patience with Cyril's people. Take a shawl. The passages are his economy too." So it was Jacintha in the still room passage at dusk, and Jacintha who found the theft in progress. Gooseberry on the ledge by the spill box, one white paw in the act of hooking a twisted spill over the edge. The cat froze. The spill dropped. Jacintha laughed and knelt for it, and a larger hand arrived on it at the same moment as hers. She had not heard him come. The Duke of Ottershaw was kneeling on the flags of a service passage in the half-dark, his hand over hers over a piece of twisted waste-paper, and the passage, which had been an ordinary width for 200 years, was suddenly very small. She could hear the rain on the leads. She could hear her own heart. Neither of them moved their hand. He was looking at her, in the way she had spent 3 years being careful to prevent, and his eyes went once, slowly, to her mouth, and the air in the passage went thin. His fingers curled a half-inch around hers. She felt the warmth of them all the way to her elbow, and she understood with terror how little she would do to stop what happened next. It was Jacintha who stood up. Because she was a servant in this house, and he was the master of it, and that sum was hers to keep, and hers alone. "Your spill, your grace," she said, and put it in his hand, and did not run, but went. To be noticed at last, she thought that night, dry-eyed and furious at the ceiling, by the one man whose notice I cannot afford. Farrant moved 3 days later, smooth as ever. He called on the dowager with papers and sympathy, and drew his chair confidingly near. "The consolidation is complete, Aunt. At Michaelmas, your establishment removes to Bath. A superior situation, society, the waters, everything suited to your years. I have taken the lodgings myself. You will find them warm." "Warm," said Griselda. "You have discovered the virtue late, Cyril. And in Bath," he went on, "perfectly pleasant. With the society of the rooms at your door, you will naturally have small need of a resident companion. Miss Pinnock shall have a fortnight's wages, and a character gladly given." He laid the words down one at a time, payment concluding all business. "She has been attentive, I am sure, in her way. Attentive young persons are readily placed." He bowed himself out and left an old woman and a young one sitting very straight in a small cold room. "I will write to my sister's people," said Griselda at last. Her voice was level, her hand on the chair-arm was aged suddenly. "Something will be contrived, child." "Of course, madam," said Jacintha, and went down at dusk with the scraps of a supper she had left untouched, and knelt at the scullery step where the saucer sat empty, and could not for a moment make herself click it against the stone. She said it very low, to the empty yard. "We are neither of us able to pay our way here." He found her 2 mornings later, in the dowager's little book-room, packing the books of nothing into a crate. The almanacs and sermon collections that furnished a shelf, and had gone unopened for 30 years. She heard the door, and knew the step before she turned. "Don't," said the Duke. He was pale, and his hands were at his sides. "Leave the books. Miss Pinnock, before anything else is said in this house, there is a thing I should have said 2 years ago, and I ask you to stand there and let me say it badly." She stood, a dead rector's sermons in both hands. "The parcels are mine." He said it flatly, unpracticed, a man reciting against his own silence. "The trimmings at the step, they have been mine almost from the first. I saw you from the gallery window, 6 in the morning, in the rain. The October after I came home, feeding a starving animal out of a servant's supper. Out of your own supper. I have kept the game larder open to you since, by the back stairs, and kept my own counsel. My cousin's rule against strays has been dead letter since the week he wrote it. I countermanded it quietly, in the one way I seem able to do anything. He looked at the crate, at her hands, anywhere but her face, and pressed on. A man watched a kindness done in secret every morning for 2 years, because it was the first thing in this house since Waterloo that made the place bearable to him, and he could not once bring himself to come down the stairs. That is the man. That is the whole of his courage, and you have now heard all of it. The room rearranged itself around her, quietly, 2 years of it. The wrong hour walks, the unenforced edict, the parcels tied with string by a duke's own hand in a locked larder before dawn. You provisioned us, she said, the 2 of us. It was the least that could be done, and I did the least. Yes, it was not the least. Her eyes were stinging, and her voice stayed gentle, and the gentleness was the blade of it. It was kind, and it was constant, and I forbid anyone to speak against the man who did it, even you. But you have just now called yourself a watcher, your grace, and there I must agree with you. You watched Mr. Farrant put out the fires. You are watching him put out your mother. A man who fights nothing loses everything, and he loses it politely, and the people who cannot afford to fight lose it with him. He took it standing, white about the mouth. He did not defend himself. It was the worst answer he could have given her, and the only honest one he had. Farrant finished the business that same week. He had watched the garden too, from better windows. On the Thursday he came upon the 3 of them at the flagstone, said not a word, smiled, and went in. That afternoon, sent for to sign for her fortnight's wages, Jacintha stood in the steward's room and watched Farrant tear a spoiled page of his own notes in 2, twist the halves, and drop them into the spill box by the grate. Idle housekeeping, waste paper on its road to the fires. She would have occasion to remember it. By evening, the household had its orders. In writing, the stray cat about the offices was vermin within the meaning of the standing rule. Gathercole the butler would see the animal drowned before quarter day. Mrs. Kedge the housekeeper came for the saucer herself, without one word of relish, because she followed the keys, and the keys were Farrant's. It went to the china cupboard, and the scullery step stood bare for the first time in 2 years. The order went out without crossing the Duke's desk. From the steward's room, while Clifford was 10 miles off at the tenant court, and down through Mrs. Kedge and Gathercole, as every order in that house had gone since January. Gathercole was 66, and had carried the old Duke to his grave. He slow-walked the order 1 full day, on the grounds that a sack could not be found, and was afraid, visibly, mortally, to slow-walk it too. "Miss," he said, stopping her by the servant's stair, and got not one word further, and she took his meaning entire. And that evening Gooseberry vanished. The step was bare, and the ledge was bare. The flue top was cold, the currants empty. Jacintha went out into the blue summer dusk to search, dismissed already and past caring who saw her, and was barely across the kitchen yard when the Duke fell in beside her without a word, in his shirt-sleeves. He had learned of it within the hour, on coming home to a bare step, and had come down at a run. 2 years of watching had spent themselves at last, and this was what remained, a man who came down the stairs. "You will not find her by calling," Jacintha said. "You cannot call a cat. You have to think as she thinks. Then think aloud, and I will follow. Warmth. She stood still in the darkening yard, working it. She is a small animal in a house that has been made cold on purpose, and she has spent all summer mapping the exceptions. The scullery ledge, cold since they raked the fire out. Her Grace's hearth. The door is kept shut now. She knows where this house is still alive better than anyone in it. So, where is the last warm place she has not shown me? They ran the great cold house through their hands room by room, and the kitchen chimney answered it. The one fire even Farrant could not order out, its warm brick spine climbing up through the walls. The still-room passage, Jacintha said slowly. The old flue cupboard. The chimney passes behind it. The back wall is warm as a loaf on baking days, and the door has hung ajar off its hinge since spring. The cupboard was low and deep. The Duke knelt and drew the crooked door wide, while Jacintha crouched at his shoulder, and warm air came out of it, carrying the smell of dust and paper. The nest filled the back corner. A summer's industry. Dozens upon dozens of stolen paper spills, carried one by one down 2 corridors in a small, determined mouth, trodden and turned and pressed into a round bed the exact shape of a sleeping cat. And in the middle of her hoard lay Gooseberry, asleep, sleek side rising and falling, one white paw curled over her nose. Jacintha lifted her out. The cat woke cross, ears pinned, offended from nose to tail tip at the liberty, and struggled once, and then hung in Jacintha's arms, radiating the dignity of the wronged. Jacintha held the warm, ungrateful weight of her, and laughed, and the laugh broke in the middle. "Miss Pinnock," the Duke said. His voice had changed. He was still kneeling, and he had gone very still. "Look at the bed." The pressed circle where the animal had slept was made of twisted spills, and the spills were of 2 papers, the housemaid's plain white, and, threaded through it, a dozen deep sheets of a heavy-laid rag paper, written over in ink. He drew one out and untwisted it with the care of a man opening a wound. Jacintha, the cat in one arm, took another. She had seen that hand every day for 3 years, on the backs of pictures, in the fly-leaves of the Dowager's books. Small, upright, unmistakable, the old Duke's. They untwisted spill after spill in the last light of the passage window, and the sheets went on and on in that dead upright hand. And then the Duke stopped breathing, because the sheet in his hands bore 3 names below a signature, and the signature was his father's, and the line above it was dated, "This 10th day of October, 1816. The page was creased and torn a little at one edge, where a larger tearing had been begun and abandoned, and it was whole. Under the pressed circle lay a stiff creased wrapper, too thick to twist, and so left flat, docketed across the front in a clear and entirely living hand. Papers removed from his late Grace's desk, February 1817. Someone had torn these pages and dropped them into the still-room spill-box, to be twisted up for firelighters, on their way to the kitchen grates, a handful at a time. In an ordinary winter, that road would have ended in February. It had not, because a house ordered to lay fires in 2 rooms only goes through very few spills. By his own economy, the man who threw the paper away had put out nearly every fire that could have burned it. And a small thieving animal, wanting a warm bed, had carried what was left off the road 1 spill at a time all summer, and slept on it. The Duke of Ottershaw knelt on the flags of a service passage with his father's will in his 2 hands, and when he spoke it was very quiet, and it was the voice of the fighting man arriving 2 years late and entire. "Fetch my mother." Mr. Sansom, attorney of the county town, came out the next morning, a compact iron-haired Welshman, with quick dark blue eyes, and was closeted an hour with the recovered sheets and the docketed wrapper, his own office draft open beside them. He came out of that hour looking 10 years older. The draft matched, every clause. He had drawn this will himself in October 1816, at the old Duke's own instruction. He and his 2 clerks had watched the old man sign it, and had signed their own names beneath his, 3 witnesses to it, and not one of the 3 a beneficiary. In February, a civil letter over Mr. Cyril Farrant's signature had told him the Duke had thought better of it, and destroyed the instrument. "I had only a draft, Your Grace, and a draft gives an attorney small standing. I let a civil letter spare me the trouble of doubting it. 50 years your family has trusted mine, and I let it lie. I am ashamed, madam." "You were lied to by a man who lies well," said Griselda. "I was not, and had only my certainty, so we are neither of us to boast. Sit down, Mr. Sansom, and take some tea." It was her drawing-room, her tea-table and her tea, and her son saw to it that the shape held, family and household only, and the law kept to one quiet man with a teacup. Mr. Cyril Farrant was summoned to his aunt's tea like a nephew, and arrived like one, into a room where the recovered sheets lay flat on the tea-table, weighted down against the draught by a cracked blue-rimmed saucer. He understood at the door. Jacintha, watching from behind the dowager's chair, saw the understanding arrive. The flick of his eyes across the torn edge, the saucer, the faces. He had been too fastidious to stand over a grate and burn a dead man's hand, and too certain that a box of waste paper would go unexamined. He had looked into the still-room box once in the spring, found it low, and gone away satisfied that the grates had taken what he put there. It had not once occurred to him to ask what else in that house carried paper away. "Cyril," said the dowager, "sit down. Mr. Sansom is going to read something aloud, and then we shall all have tea." Sansom read the will of the 10th of October, 1816, plainly, without ornament. Title and entailed land as before, by patent and settlement. Everything else to my son Clifford, Duke of Ottershaw, whom I appoint executor of this my will, together with my attorney, Mr. Sansom. To my beloved wife, over and above her settled jointure, the dower house for her life, the furniture and plate in it, and £400 by the year. Legacies to the servants by name. Gathercole's 40 years, priced in plain figures that made the old man's voice unusable for the rest of the day. Mrs. Kedge, the cook, the pensioners restored, and to my nephew, Cyril Farrant, £100, and my hope that he will find honest employment for his gifts. Into the silence, Farrant said, "A curious paper to find intact. I understood it had been destroyed." "That is the only point of law we shall want this afternoon," said Sansom, "and it is short. A will is not revoked because another man tears it after the testator is dead. It may be revoked only by the testator himself, or by another in his presence and at his direction. These pages were torn afterwards, and your own hand says so." He turned the creased wrapper round so that the docket faced its writer. Papers removed from his late Grace's desk, February 1817. This will was never lawfully revoked. It stands, sir, my draft, my own name at the foot of it, and my 2 living clerks will prove it wherever proof is called for. The rest is short too, Sansom said. I shall prove this will. The grant under the will of 1809 is called in, and Mr. Farrant accounts to the estate for every pound and acre he has dealt with since January. There is a renunciation drawn, sir, and you will sign it before you leave the room. What else might be asked of you is not business for a drawing-room, and need not be asked at all. The tea went cold, and every voice stayed level. Farrand looked once more round the table, at his cousin, who looked back and held his peace, and had ceased hoarding it, at the saucer, doing duty as a paperweight, at his aunt. "You will want to be in Bath by quarter day, Cyril," said Griselda. "The lodgings are already taken in your name, I believe." He signed the renunciation where Sansom's finger rested, neatly, as he did everything. It was mercy with a straight back, and he took it. He rose, bowed to the correct depth, and paused at the door. "You have all been," he said pleasantly, "so very much luckier than you deserve," and was gone. The county went without the particulars. The family declined to supply them. That evening, the Duke of Ottershaw walked out of the garden door with a cracked blue-rimmed saucer carried before him in both hands, past Mrs. Kedge, who held the door, correct to the last, and permitted herself one dry sentence. "I shall strike the standing rule out of the book tonight, Your Grace, and gladly," and down the kitchen garden to the broad flagstone, where he set the saucer down in full view of every window on that side, and clicked it once against the stone. Gooseberry was in no hurry. She came out of the lavender in her own time, ate crouched, ignored him utterly, and left with her tail up. "The arrears, I think," said the dowager from the path, dry as sand, "are settled." He came to the garden at 6 the next morning, when the sun was full on the flags, and Gooseberry sat on the warm stone attending to her white bib. Jacintha knelt by the cold frames. He stopped on the path, took his hat in both hands, and she stood up, because she could hear a man's whole courage gathering from 3 feet away. "I had this arranged," he said. "It began with the estate, the fortune restored, the settlement, what I can now put in your name. I shall not say it, because you would tell me, gently, that it was fighting nothing. So you shall have the other speech instead. 2 years ago, I watched a woman feed what nobody wanted, at an hour when nobody watched. She did it out of her own supper, in the rain, and asked no leave, and told no one, and I thought, there is the only person in this house who is rich. I was the other unwanted creature at Ottershaw, Miss Pinnock, fed by servants, seen at windows, belonging nowhere. You kept watch over one of us, and never knew you kept watch over both." He stopped there a moment, and made himself go on. "I have watched 2 years, and I am done watching. Will you marry me?" "Yes," said Jacintha, and got it out first and alone, so that everything after it could only be decoration. Then her heart caught up with her mouth, and she added, "Yes, although your grace should know the estate speech might have answered too, and been shorter. I shall keep it for the wedding," he said gravely. "And you should know what you are getting. A companion turned off without a character, a rector's daughter with 11 pounds in the world, and a cat that steals. I am getting," said the Duke, "the only person in this house who is rich. I have said so already. I have thought it for 2 years, every morning, at this hour, on this stone." He looked down at the flagstone between them. "Everything I own was handed to me, madam. You are the one thing I shall ever have chosen." Then neither of them was grave at all, and Gooseberry went on washing, unconsulted, in the sun. That evening she backed him into the window bay, close enough to count his eyelashes, and set out her conditions one at a time, and he heard each of them out. "I remain her Grace's companion, as a daughter now, and never again for wages, but I keep the post. She did not lose me to Bath, and she shall not lose me to you. Granted, and gratefully. Second, nobody in my hearing in this house is ever again to be called vermin, 4-footed or otherwise. Never again, and I will say so to the household myself. Third, the fires, lit in every room this house lives in, from Michaelmas to May Day, and I will hear no argument from economy. Economy that starves a house is theft wearing an apron. My mother said something very like it in January. Granted. You are aware, madam, that you have yet to ask for anything on your own behalf. 3 terms, and every one of them for somebody else. A jointure, pin money, a carriage. These are the usual articles. I am marrying the carriage, said Jacintha. It comes with a park. So it does, he said gravely. Continue. Last. Gooseberry is household, not favour. A china bowl of her own, the morning room, and the right to sit where she pleases, including upon dukes. Granted, said the Duke, with amendments. The rent stands, 1 mouse per quarter, never yet delivered, the arrears to be carried forward in perpetuity and inspected at breakfast. And the 6 o'clock on that flagstone stands. I was not asked to the first 2 years of it, madam, and I do not mean to miss any of the rest. Then she took his coat in both hands and kissed him, warm and unhurried, the man who had finally come down the stairs. Gooseberry, on the window seat, went on washing. They were married at Abbotsmead Church, where her father had preached for 30 years, on a bright cold morning, in a small stone room, holding everyone who mattered, and nobody else at all. Jacintha wore deep rose silk, and her face had stopped being careful, and what had been under the carefulness all along was beauty. The dowager was magnificent in garnet velvet, and outshone the bride on purpose, by arrangement between them. 50 years ago I stood where you stand, she told Jacintha at the church door, and I can report that the institution answers. Mind you make him laugh. It is the entire secret, and I give it to you for a wedding present, having received it myself in 1767. Mrs. Kedge was correct. Gathercole was not correct at all. He wept straight through the vows with 40 years' service shaking in his shoulders, and was mopped up afterwards by the cook. Winter came properly in December, and stood no chance. There was a fire in the hall, and one in the gallery, and one in the still-room passage, and one behind the open door of the 2 rooms that had been a garrison and were now merely the dowager's. A house that had been told for a year to be cold was told otherwise, and obeyed. And through that house, on a snowy evening, walked a sleek and insolent Calico, past the roaring hall fire, past the gallery, past the kitchen itself, spoilt now for choice of every warm place in a great house, walking on, tail up, to the morning room, where a china bowl sat by the fender and a cracked blue-rimmed saucer stood on the mantel, which nobody in the household explained and everybody understood. Gooseberry stepped over the Duke's boots, ignored the dowager entire, climbed into the lap of the woman by the fire, turned round twice, and slept. The last warm place chosen. And that is the story of Jacintha and Clifford, of Griselda who was right from the first, and of Gooseberry, the stray who paid no rent and settled every debt at Ottershaw Park. The kindest things we do, friends, are usually the ones we do when we think nobody is looking, and somebody nearly always is. So tell us true in the comments, who fed the stray at your house, and who noticed your kindness when you thought nobody was watching. We read every comment. If this story warmed you, a like helps more than you know, and subscribe so you don't miss an evening with us. Until next time, keep the saucer full, and God bless.